Hello, hello. I'm Kier.
And I'm Liam.
And this is Hot Take Think Tank, a podcast for culture war dropouts about trade-offs, awkward trade-offs in the pursuit of progress. This last week, I wrote an essay called My Life as an Anarchist, because I've kind of started to use the handle of Recovering Anarchist on some of my accounts. And I had a reader kind of say, you should tell us more about your time as an anarchist to better kind of understand the rest of your writing.
I have to agree with that reader, because when you started using that handle, I was like, Kier was an anarchist? I knew you were like anarchist adjacent, but I didn't know you'd sort of gone full anarchist ever. But
that's
now
so
I know.
funny. Yeah, I mean, I didn't know that you didn't know. But
Yeah.
I think we weren't as close at that time because I, being the oldest sibling, left right at 18, left the house.
Yep. And moved to like across the country, and it's a big
across
country.
the country. Yes, and was very bad about keeping in touch with my family for a while, including you. So, yeah, I think you missed sort of the anarchist peak that I had.
Totally. Yeah. By the time, I feel like when you were moving back, you were back social justice warrior was your, yeah, I always associate you more with that part of the left than the anarchists, if they are part of the left.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like it was this kind of funny transition because it's like when I was kind of in the social justice world, people definitely called themselves anarchists, but they weren't doing what the anarchists that I knew in my early 20s were doing. It wasn't like an identity per se. In those early 20s, it was like these were people that were like going out and doing clandestine actions.
Right. Yeah. I feel like that also, it just brings to mind the difference between like Quebec and British Columbia for me. I don't know why.
Yes.
I think that activists in Montreal, they seem to go a little harder than the activists in Vancouver. No offense to any Vancouver activists.
No, I mean, it's 100% true. It is so easy to get people in the streets in Montreal. Like they're just waiting for the next reason to. And even like student demonstrations, like everyone will show up for that. You don't have to be a student. So yeah, that's really where I became an anarchist, Montreal. And also like I managed to get arrested like 3 times, like in the span of a year, I think it was, which was 1 arrest at the G20 in Toronto and then 2 in Montreal, both having to do with actions as well. So yeah, it's both the protesters that are like, what's a good word? More flamboyant out there. Like annually on the Anti-Police Brutality Day, Montreal activists like throw fireworks at the cops and there's like brawls in the streets every year. Whereas, Vancouver people, they're indoor people. They stay home more.
Yeah, totally. And a lot of the protests have like police escorts, and it seems to be all a peaceful interaction between the two parts.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely say that like the Montreal police and the Toronto police and the other police that were there for the G20 were very brazen. They would take off their badge numbers and whatever. They did whatever they wanted to. They didn't have any restraint. And Vancouver police, I've seen them do horrible things, but it is less frequent.
Right.
They do tend to, in general, not escalate situations as frequently as the Montreal police love escalating situations from my experience. So yeah, it feels like there's like this symbiotic relationship that is like, a lot more fiery over there.
Yeah. The extremism on one side drives extremism on the other side. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, it was quite a time. I kind of wondered, Liam, like how, like, did anything like shock you about this essay? Like, cause it seems normal to me because I was there, but. Right. Yes, I would say yes. I always pictured you as a very peaceful protester. And particularly the paragraph where you describe, what are they called? The insurrectionary anarchists, was sort of startling to me because it reads like, I
I don't know, like something out of a movie where there's like an evil empire and like a small group of outlaws trying to bring the whole system down.
Yeah.
Which I guess I just didn't even know that really existed in Canada because I don't know, we have, like you mentioned in the article, a high standard of living, and we have like a democracy, and the idea that there are people who like get together to plan like I don't know, terrorist attacks, not quite, but like sabotaging machinery, destroying property, inciting riots, blockading ports. That's pretty intense stuff, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And I will say that, like, I always considered myself more of a mass anarchist, and that's a distinction I draw in the essay. But I definitely knew the insurrectionary anarchists, or some of them anyway. Right. And there was sort of this funny, like, we had solidarity with each other, and we would see each other at events and, the Anarchist Book Fair in Victoria, that sort of thing. But we also, like, I think talked a lot of shit about each other because we, my camp sort of, I don't know, thought they were pretty wacky, even though we were also anarchists. We thought that they were a little out there.
Right. Yeah, totally. Was there like, they weren't just talk, I take it? They actually would like organize and do things like that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the thing is like, vast majority of the time it's anonymous. Sometimes they'll like take credit for it in an anonymous way. This action was done, in solidarity with this, or to draw attention to this, without like, naming the particular people who did the action. These people were doing things. They weren't just sitting on their chairs typing on Twitter. They were
also interesting to read that that group sort of is opposed to reforms that make things better for people, because that means that the revolution is less likely. That's a weird, like, perverse incentive, sort of, the idea that like we want the current system to be overthrown, so we want. It's like we don't even want to give the current system a chance to get better, right?
We want things to like get worse until everyone is sort of in a position where they have so much misery that they're ready to like do whatever they have to change it. Right. I did find that perverse, and I still do, but it's something. I mean, I got like a message just the other day from someone who sort of accused me of being a centrist because I support reforms.
Interesting. So that strain is still going strong. The idea that we shouldn't make things better in the current system. We have to let it rot and destroy it.
Exactly. Well, because basically that, to this person's way of thinking, that makes me like a capitalist, or at least like in cahoots with capitalism by trying to make people's lives better without taking down capitalism. And I do think it's kind of this funny thing where it's like, my article says clearly, like, I'm not going to spend my time trying to foment a revolution. If it happens that an anti-capitalist revolution pops up in my part of the world, I would be very interested in that and, consider getting involved depending on a number of factors. But I know that the solidarity does not go the other way, right? Like, this person is not interested in backing me up or what I'm working on, because that person basically sees me as on the other side. Because I'm
if you're not for us, you're against us.
I'm not radical enough.
It's a topic we get back to often, and this feels like one of the most stark examples of it. The idea of like ideological goals versus material goals, and the idea of like, let's actually make people's lives worse so that our system rises to power is like as stark as it gets for that.
It's like maybe I'm wrong about this, but I feel like you can't already be like in serious material deprivation to think that makes sense. Like, I think you have to be reasonably comfortable and maybe even a bit immune, right? Like, you're not going to be the person to suffer the most in this scheme. You want the people to suffer, but not like you specifically, right?
No, totally. I don't know if it's a helpful thought that I have often or not, but whenever people sort of describe, I don't know, it comes up when people are talking about like, sort of romanticizing like previous societies or like the agrarian way of life sort of, whenever, I don't know, I often, not that often, find myself arguing about like, that infant mortality rate is lower than ever before, and that is really good. And there's just something about like the flow of immigration that I feel like backs me up, that lots of people try to get into these like, Western democracies. And it generally doesn't go the other way. Like people in Canada very rarely are like, I'm actually going to move to, I don't know, even like South Africa, let alone like Afghanistan or Bhutan or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a revealed preference. It's like some people might say that a different way is good, but it's interesting to see if people actually sort of vote with their feet and move to countries that more align with their ideas.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that's hard if you're an anti-capitalist, because there aren't that many places to go.
Okay. I did want to ask you about this because it's like, is there any concern among the anarchists that there isn't like an example they can point to of like, see, it worked over there? It seems kind of glaring to me.
Well, I think there's some like misconceptions about that. I think that there have been like more successful communist or like anti-capitalist uprisings than most people think. A lot of them have failed as well. But I do think that, and a lot of them haven't lasted for a long time, right? They have like this somewhat brief, experience and then some force comes in. And that's like a huge problem that I've seen, right? Is it's like, if you want to have a successful coup or insurgency or something like that, like you need to have the numbers and you need to have like, I mean, basically you need to have the support of the army. You need to be able to turn the army against the government, or you need to be able to like beat the army. And if you can't do either of those, like it's not going to go very well. And there's also, I mean, I think there is a lot of pressure from sort of the global economic forces to kind of fall in line. And, the embargo against Cuba is an example of that.
Sure.
That countries get punished if they're not willing to, cooperate in the ways that, that are kind of expected of developed countries or whatever you want to say. So if you did have like a radically different economic system, like I do feel like there would be so many different forces pressing down on you, trying to undo that. And that's one reason why I think like a successful anarchist uprising seems really unlikely. But that's also why they're so militant, right? Like,
yeah,
because,
although I do feel like that gets at something else where I think that the big problem the big economies would have with like an anarchist uprising in Canada, like what they put embargoes on, I think actually might come down to whether it was like a violent military uprising versus gradual reform through democracy. I think that most like policies that the government could institute wouldn't result in like embargoes. But I think like as a disincentive to other violent groups overthrowing their governments, I think they like to provide that disincentive of like, if you overthrow your government, your country is out of the club for a while.
I think if you look at the history of the CIA, you'll find that actually a lot of coups and kind of puppet regimes have absolutely been supported by the US and by Canada that matter. But yes, I think like if it was seen as like an anti-democratic force, right, where it's like you don't have the majority of people supporting you, it would be very hard to, like get your way into the
totally.
UN
Not become a pariah.
recognizing you.
Yeah,
exactly.
I feel like you'd be a pariah state pretty quick if you have to kill people to make it happen.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that's the tricky part, is that like there are a lot of people who feel like it's like, okay, like, do I want to vote for neoliberalism or neoliberalism, right? Like, I do think it's true that there is a real narrow range of options that are electable. So that's
interesting.
That's a frustration that definitely leads some people to ideologies like anarchism.
Yeah, I think that particularly is a problem in Canada and the States with like our first past the post election systems.
Agreed. Yeah.
Because like there are other countries like, I don't know, Germany, where they have like several weird fringe parties that get to be in parliament.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I don't I think that's part of. I do think that even if we had like the proportional representation system here, I would be surprised if something so fringe like ended up as a part, as the ruling majority. I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Which says something about it though, that like it's not widely appealing enough.
Well,
right?
yeah, I would say like that's one of the biggest shifts for me, is that like both anarchism and social justice really kind of believe strongly in minorities, right? Like social justice particularly is like we need to take care of minorities. We need to have them be in leadership position because otherwise their needs are going to be overlooked. But the flip side of that is that then you can have policies that are widely unpopular, but that appeal to sort of the squeaky wheels, or like the loudest faction of a party. Those are the policies that end up getting the most airtime, getting discussed the most. And that can be alienating to the majority.
Right. That's fascinating. I never thought of it in that term before, but the idea that it's like, that some sort of like a repressed group is not a majority and might hold opinions that aren't the opinions that the majority holds. And despite that, those ideas should be implemented. Yeah. As sort of like a rebalancing sort of project.
I think it is really interesting because it's not the idea that like, oh, let's win people over. Like we're a small group of people, like people aren't really familiar with us. A lot of people haven't even met someone from our community. So they might have misconceptions. So like, let's clear that up and let's, figure out like common ground. It's not that approach at all, right? It's like, it's very anti-assimilation a lot of the time, right? It's like, I shouldn't have to, adapt to the Canadian way of life or the American way of life or whatever. My community shouldn't have to do that. And we should have we should be accommodated, in the ways that we need to be. Totally. It's an interesting idea. And I wouldn't say that I'm like, all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I don't care about minorities anymore. Like, obviously not.
No, totally. But I do feel like there's something different in being like this minority, we need to like implement their policy ideas, versus we need to have laws that allow every minority and majority to like have freedom of expression, have freedom of religion, have freedom of that sort of thing. Sort of like it seems like the two different approaches to catering isn't quite the right word, but to make life better for everyone, including people who are like poorly represented in government. Is it do you go out of your way to make changes for them, or can you get most of the way there by making like broad-based changes that improve things for everyone?
It's a great question. And again, like there really are awkward trade-offs, right? Like there's kind of no way around that. It's like if you have people who are in a minority where there's like a lot stricter gender segregation, for example, and you want women to be able to swim from that community or use the pool facilities, like you might need to make some policies so that they can have the pool exclusively at a certain time. And then, of course, the conspiracy theorists will swoop in about how Saskatoon is being taken over by Muslims or whatever, because they have an hour at a pool a week.
Right. Yeah. Well, and then people swoop in from both directions, because then there's the other people who say that you can't do that because you're like allowing this sexist structure to go on existing, right? And that the solution isn't to accommodate, but is to, assimilate, I guess.
Yeah, it's funny, actually. This reminds me, the pool where I swim a couple times a week did renovations only a couple years ago, maybe like 2020. And when they reopened, they had completely changed the change rooms. So in this new pool, there are no gender change rooms at all. It's only single stall change rooms and showers. Everything is closed, and there are benches and lockers in the middle, and it's like very open concept, like there's no corners or anything like that, and you're actually not allowed to change not in a stall. And I thought that was just really interesting, right? Because there are like such debates right now about like gender and washrooms and change rooms and all of that. And they were kind of like, okay, everything's unisex, but nobody's naked around anybody else. Like, which I did think was interesting. I mean, I'm into it because I actually used to lifeguard there. And like, I remember the day that there was an extremely creepy man who was watching children. And this is a real thing that happens. And, it was well dealt with. Basically, he was like completely tailed by a male lifeguard while we waited for the police to come. But yeah, I don't know. So it would be much harder. Like, you can't really watch anyone the way that you could in the old change rooms.
That seems good. Yeah.
Which seems good. Yeah. But I wonder, I'm curious if there were any trade-offs there, anyone who like the new setup doesn't work for. I'm not sure.
Who knows? It's I'm trying to think if there's anywhere else in public that people get naked together. Maybe, I guess those are going the way of the dinosaur.
I think that might be it. Yeah. And like, I should say, like, I've been at that pool like 1,000 times, and there was only that one time with the totally. Guy. So it's unusual, but it's a thing that, it's a place where people who want to watch children go to do that sometimes. Right. So having these like really open change rooms seems like a good thing, probably.
Okay, so I was also interested in your journey, I guess, away from anarchy. It sounded like a big part of it was an interview you listened to that brought up just how many resources the state has, and that if you want to sort of distribute resources where they are needed, there's sort of no mechanism like it.
No.
Which is interesting.
It was an extremely convincing argument for me. Because mutual aid is like such a huge idea in the anarchist scene, right?
Could you define that for me? I could guess based on the word mutual aid. It's helping each other is what that means. Yeah.
Basically, yes. I mean, I think the idea is like, the state will always be racist, it'll always be sexist and ableist and blah, blah, blah. And so we can take care of each other, and our efforts are better. Right. It's better for us to put our effort into building like alternative structures and alternative capaccy, rather than trying to like grovel to the state to do that for us.
Interesting idea.
It is. And I will say that there are like moments where we do need that, like moments of emergency. Like a lot of anarchists have amazing logistical skills, and they can like set up a kitchen anywhere, or really practical things like that. But
interesting.
It's not scalable.
Totally. No, it did make me think of just a weird statistic I am aware of that I looked up to get the exact number. In Canada, the total tax take is a third of our gross domestic product,
Yeah.
which is very substantial. So it's sort of two weird ideas, or are hard to quite conceptualize. But yeah, roughly a third of everything that is made in the country is for or by the government. And I mean, the way most people encounter that is that on every single paycheck, roughly a third is held back to go to the government. And I think that would be a hard rate to achieve in an unelected state where you aren't threatening violence.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I
luck.
mean? Like,
good luck collecting that.
it's like there's like sort of an agreement, a social contract or whatever, that it's like, all right, we live in democracy. We have some say through elections what happens with this money. We have school, we have roads, we have hospitals. You can take a third of my paycheck. But like if you had to, like through mutual aid, try and get to that rate, a third of everything that everyone makes going to, to the greater good. That seems like a high. I mean, I'm sure you'd find your true believers who would happily do more than that, but I'm just not sure you'd have enough true believers to average out.
You don't have enough true believers. You'll never have enough true believers. Well, yeah, and I think it's interesting too, because it's like, I think when it comes to government programs, like a lot of the more targeted programs, I know, at least in the States, like there was like this Black Farmers Fund, for example, that was, going to give money to Black farmers. And it's been held up in court because it's discriminatory, right? Like,
right. Yeah.
There are lots of farmers that aren't Black that are equally as in need, right? So that's one of the big things with mutual aid is like, if you want to have a very particular mission, like you can do that, you know? But again, like, I guess now that I've come to feel like improving universal programs is still a superior idea to being like, oh, well, this group is completely disenfranchised. So, let's kind of try and patch together an equivalent service for them. Like, I don't know. It's just, how? How are you going to do that?
Yeah, interesting. It does seem like, I don't know, it's always easy to romanticize ideas before you have to implement them. And I feel like there's a lot of that going on where it's like, and then we'll just figure out how all the resources need to flow. And it's like, that's actually the whole crux of modern civilization is figuring that one out. So I'm not sure you can, over that part of your plan.
No, it's interesting. Cause I mean, in a lot of ways, anarchism is supposed to be like hyper local, right? It's like locals should be able to make the decisions for their region. But exactly what that looks like in practice, it gets really muddy. And then it's like, I don't know, the more you learn about like really small elections, like elections on First Nations reservations, for example, there's like this imposed system by the Indian Act, the sort of chief system that holds elections. But then some people don't even recognize those because there were hereditary chiefs that weren't recognized by the government. And then you can end up like just having some really nasty stuff go down. And it's not because those people are indigenous, like any small group that had been, basically had so much infighting caused by like governments, like, I don't know, coming in a particular way would probably act the same. Like, lots of like power grabs and, what like things really, and maybe even like vengeance when the opposite people get in. Oh, look, that land's gone or whatever, right? Giving so that like becoming a bit more aware of just the complexities of like very small scale electoral politics is like, oh man, like how are we ever going to organize on that scale?
I'm curious. You did bring up the idea of the the monopoly on violence that the state has. I'm sort of curious how you think about that concept these days.
Yeah. Well, I remember back in my anarchist days, I had this hat and it had a patch on it that said Homo Militia. And I think I got that patch at the Montreal Anarchist Book Fair. And I thought it was kind of funny. And, you know, people would like see it and, you know, give me a thumbs up or whatever. I was very like extremely punk at this time. And then I met someone who had lived somewhere with militias. And yeah, I stopped wearing my hat after I talked to him because he really like, and in a very like generous way, he was just sort of like, do you know what it's like living in a place that's ruled by like warring factions? And I was like, no, I definitely do not. So yeah, the whole like there are problems with the police. That's like obvious, you know, some of them are due to misunderstandings or neglect. Some of them definitely do. It's because of like immunity, basically. Like certain departments have never really faced that much discipline, so they kind of do what they want. There can be like fraternity code of silence stuff. There's all sorts of stuff going on, right?
Well, and just I feel like there's like a selection bias in like what kind of person is like, yeah, I want to be a police officer as my career.
Yes.
There's
especially like
after a certain type.
Yeah, after 2020 particularly, right? Because maybe people that were on the fence or felt neutrally about police maybe leaned towards not liking them. So, you know, did that affect who is willingly going into it? So there's so much, you know, it's great to have independent oversight. It's great to, there's all sorts of reforms that have happened and should keep happening. But the question is like, what's the alternative, right? Like, and usually if there is not an effective police force, what you have is vigilantes or gangs, right? That's who steps into that power vacuum, right?
Yeah,
and that's
usually,
not great.
Usually several different groups of people who, I mean, the opposite of a monopoly is like a competitive market, right? And I feel like that applies here. If there's not anyone with a monopoly on violence, then like you can compete to win the rewards that come with being the most violent, right?
It's not good.
Which seems very bad. I mean, you strive for no violence. But I think probably second best would be, having the only violence allowed be imbued in like a system that has like accountability and oversight. Not perfect, obviously, but at least it's sort of like in the hands of a system that can be reformed.
And can be like made to answer for their choices and like all sorts of stuff. It is. I mean, that's one of the things I've probably moved on the most, and it feels. I mean, or like changed my mind on the most, I guess is what I'm saying. And it feels weird to say it because I like have personally experienced police brutality. So it's not something that I'm like dismissive of. It's like a really serious issue, but at the same time, it's just like. Some of the alternatives that have been proposed or the ways of like dealing with it seem ridiculous.
Totally. Interesting.
Speaking of ridiculous.
Should we move on to topic number 2?
Yes, I think so.
Sounds good. Okay, topic number 2 we wanted to talk about is Google's woke AI. And this article that says the title is Google's woke AI wasn't a mistake. We know, we were there.
Dun, dun, dun.
Very dramatic. I don't think the authors, Francesca Block and Olivia Reingold, were there, but they interviewed people who had been there within a few years of when this fiasco happened.
Yes.
So just to catch people up if they didn't follow the story at all, Google is a software company. They run a search engine.
All right, speed it up, Liam.
And they released a new product called Google Gemini, which is their generative artificial intelligence product, sort of like a ChatGPT competitor. And it produced hilariously over-the-top political changes to image requests. So someone would ask for like images of British royalty, and it would come back with like racially diverse British royalty, including like First Nations people, Black people, Asian people. It would basically refuse to generate any, like you could ask, a picture of a black man and you'd get some, picture of an Asian man, you'd get some, picture of a white man. Sorry, I don't produce that kind of political image. And then it also, like, they ended up shutting off image generation pretty darn quick because it was sort of egregious. And then people started finding weird answers to just text-based questions. Things like someone asked, like, who is worse, Hitler or Elon Musk? And the chat box just, like, equivocated, being like, it's hard to evaluate who has been worse for society.
All right. As not a fan of Elon Musk, I still think I know the answer to this question.
Yeah, totally. Well, it's just, okay. Yeah. So that happened, and it sort of became a big story. I think particularly, I mean, it's like grist for the mill of right-wing media. That's like all the tech companies are like overcome by woke activists, right? And sort of what I assess more to be like just like a product failure was taken to be like this was their intention. They meant to totally, unwhitewash history or whatever. Yeah, and so this article interviews several former Google employees who think that this issue was caused by long-term cultural issues within Google. Yeah, and I found it mostly interesting, sort of inflammatory in some places, interesting in others.
It is from the Free Press, so
yes, totally.
They have a taste for fiery articles. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. I think my experience in the social justice world is that, yes, absolutely, they're looking to reform every single company, every single public institution in their image.
Right,
like,
totally.
That is like explicitly a goal. They might not even like me saying reform because it's supposed to be more radical than that. And yeah, just like there is a real suspicion towards facts, reason, historical accuracy. Those are often, like, if you care about those, you might be made fun of. You'll probably be called, a white supremacist or a colonial thinker or something like that.
Interesting. So you think you knew people who would have seen this version of Google Gemini and been like, yes, good. That's how AI should work.
It's tough though, right? Because we're kind of talking about unintended consequences again, right? Like, I don't think that many people were happy that when you asked for an image of a Nazi, you got a black person. That's weird. That doesn't make sense. Yeah. That doesn't actually like advance diversity, right? So it definitely went sideways.
Yes. And I think that's an interesting thing you just mentioned, that it doesn't advance diversity, because that makes me think of the question is this the right avenue to advance diversity?
Right.
It seems like a weird... I mean, I think in the article, one of the interviewees mentions that what happened here was like too much of a good thing. And then I did see in the Free Press comments, people being like, there's no good thing here. This is, absurd from the start. I think, and the article didn't elaborate at all what the good thing was. So I think I might hear what they were trying to avoid through this fine tuning, where this seems to have happened, or possibly prompt engineering, is the situation where you say, I want an image of a mathematician and they're all male, right? And you ask it 100 times and all 100 of them are male. That would be bad. I think, right? You don't
I guess so, but also I'm sure if you typed in female mathematician, then it would be smart enough to give you that. Or if you typed in an Asian mathematician. Right. I think what I'm confused by is it's like, well, what should the default be? Like, if you don't specify what you want. And I understand that, like, for variety of historical reasons, people don't want that to be a white man because they're like tired and bored of that or whatever. But like, I don't know, should I have green skin? Like, what's the, there is no default human. Well, white man is not a default human, but nor is an Asian woman, right? Like,
totally.
it's a weird problem.
It is a weird problem. I think that there's like something truly difficult here where it's like, in the past, there was like a whole controversy with Google, I don't know, a while ago, where if you searched CEO into Google image search, the results were more skewed towards white males than the actual proportion of CEOs or whatever. And this ended up being like a big story, and Google, I don't know, tried to change their algorithm to more accurately reflect the real life balance, right? And it's I don't know, you'd kind of hope that the product isn't like, you know, even more biased than real life. I guess. I mean, that's probably not a good thing for it to be, but that's one of the tricky things with this AI stuff is that they don't even get to show you, you know, 100 images of CEOs and then you can like check the percentages or whatever.
Right.
It's like they have to send back an image.
Exactly.
Which is, it's like it has to collapse all of these probabilities into, you know, 100% for one and 0% for all the others.
Yeah. I can't help but just feel like, who cares?
Right.
Like, really, who cares
Totally.
what the like default image is? Because again, you put in your descriptors and you'll get what you want. Like, it's, I don't know. I'm not saying there's like no problem there, but I kind of feel like there's no problem there. Like there's no solution that's going to make everyone happy. That's not possible. I mean, I guess maybe the machine could prompt you and be like, can you give me more descriptors or whatever?
Right. Yeah.
But like, I don't know. It just seems like a weird thing to be hung up on, especially if like the result is that you get black Nazis and like, I don't know.
Yeah. I think you do have to, in the conversation, just like pull apart a bit, like what they were intending to do worthwhile.
Right.
Because I think it's obvious to everyone, including like the CEO, that how they tried to do it failed spectacularly.
Totally.
Like no one is we did great with this. But it's interesting. It's definitely something Google has like built up over time, I think. They mention in this article the James Damore memo, which was a big story in 2017. This Google developer who basically wrote a memo that got into lots of really murky waters and said some things that are sensible and some things that were not sensible and offensive, I guess. It called Google's ideological echo chamber. Sort of, I think the main thrust of it was about whether like implicit bias was the reason for the gender disparity in the workforce at Google, or if something from evolutionary biology could be at play.
Right.
And I would tend to think probably it's not the I would tend to think it's not the evolutionary biology reason. But despite where that debate falls, that person was fired. And
unceremoniously, I believe.
And he ended up like suing the company. I don't remember how it all came how it all ended, but it definitely sort of sent, I think, a message in the company of like, I mean, like what we talk about, the ideological purity, right? Like this isn't these sorts of things aren't up for debate in Google. We don't tell your boss that you think Gemini should produce more white mathematicians or whatever.
No, that's not going to go well.
Totally. And just like in your own self-interest, if you want to rise through the ranks at Google, don't talk about this stuff or talk about it in like the sanctioned ways.
That's honestly, yeah, that's really interesting to think about, right? Where it's like, if they sort of manage to create this homogeneity of not necessarily how people thought, but like what they were willing to say about these types of decisions. Yeah, like you said, it would be incentivized to like support these specific diversity initiatives. And that even like, it would not at all be a surprise to me if people who, you know, had critiques or concerns were interpreted as being just straight up racist or sexist or whatever, that they were like counter to what we're doing here, right? You're not a good fit for this company. And that's like not what you want in a corporate culture, I don't think, because there are blind spots that like somebody needs to point out. And like, if you remove everybody who's doing that, and then, you know, so there's a very clear understanding among everyone who has not been fired, you know, what is and isn't welcome going forward, like you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot at that point.
Totally. Yeah, no, I think like the core disappointing thing about the whole Google Gemini launch was that it's like not a very good product. And like beyond all this stuff, it's like Google, you'd think, would be making the coolest new AI product available. And they just haven't yet. They sort of like invented, like their research groups made the breakthroughs that let OpenAI launch ChatGPT. Like that stuff was invented at Google, and they sort of failed to launch a product over it. Someone else beat them to it, and now they're like playing catch up. And they're not even playing catch up very well.
No.
And it's like, and it's just this weird like timidity or this mindset of like, it's like when they have their priorities, right? And it's like they want to make a great product and they want to not offend people. And I think they prioritize them in the wrong direction, right? Where it's like, it seems like the last team that got like the final go ahead on Google Gemini was the let's not be racist team instead of the let's build something great team.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was interesting too, because, you know, conservatives definitely express concern that, not just conservatives, but in general, concern that like diversity is being put above, like being prioritized more than, you know, the competence of an employee or whatever. And there's a quote from the article that says, McGuire says at first he supported initiatives to hire more diverse candidates until he realized his colleagues were pushing to prioritize applicants' race and gender over their qualifications for the jobs. Right. So, Liam, I want to run something by you and see what you think. So, I have a friend who works for a crown corporation and uses sort of like business to business software. I think she said it was Google based. And she has worked there for a number of years at this point and has noticed like a real decline in the quality, a lot more glitchiness, and also that like things don't get fixed in like a reasonable time frame when they're reported to not be working. And
interesting.
I'm trying to remember like how much of this is what she said and how much of it is what I have thought since then. So keep that in mind. But basically, like, I was thinking about how there was like this huge hiring frenzy in tech, right, in 2021 and 2022. Yep. And there was also a lot of hires in DEI in the same time period. The departments were growing and being established and stuff. So then, you know, since then, there have been layoffs in both of those industries. Yeah. And so I think my friend basically felt that during the hiring frenzy, a lot of underqualified people got hired, basically, who couldn't really do what it was that they're expected to do. I mean, I think some people weren't even really given assignments. They were just sort of put on retainer.
Yeah. Hired so that no one else could hire them kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think she seemed to think that there was like a noticeable degradation in the products with this like hiring frenzy and layoff, and now you don't have enough people, and maybe some of the people you have don't know what they're doing. And it's almost like if that is a phenomenon that's happening, it's like almost a coincidence of time that like the diversity stuff lines up with the wild hiring, right?
Yeah,
like
totally.
If there had been like a huge hiring frenzy and only white men applied, then we'd have a bunch of people in that category who didn't have the qualifications that were previously needed for that position. And maybe because of the, like, they just dovetailed in this way where it's like, well, you know, they happened to hire, you know, in a diverse way while they were, you know, just hiring everybody. What do you think about any of that?
I would, I'd think that probably the DEI stuff has a small, if any, effect on the quality of the software. I don't know. Sure. I definitely think that, that the tech industry didn't handle the pandemic very well with the huge hiring boom, as if the growth during the pandemic was like here to stay, and, you know, or the growth line of the pandemic was here to stay, right? Because everyone all of a sudden is using their computers more. And it's like, oh, and then next year they'll use it even more, as opposed to going back to how they did, you know, before the pandemic. So I think that is a real thing for sure. And I think like it's with software, you can totally overextend and like build a feature set larger than you can sustain if the team gets smaller afterwards, right?
Right.
You could totally like expand, you know, the total product feature set in a way that needs a big team to maintain. But then if it's like not that successful a product, or if the whole company has to contract, or even if you build features planning to continue growing your team, and then you don't get to continue growing in that way. Yeah, it could totally mess up the gears of software development. But,
so then it almost sounds like it might just like be more of a coincidence of timing that like, you know, diversity became more and more of a priority. But these kind of sloppy hiring and training and like work culture issues, like did not stem from that. You think that's,
Yeah, that's what I would lean towards for sure. It's and that does remind me of some of the stories from these the interviewees in the article, who I think similarly had troubles in their career that coincided with DEI stuff, and I didn't think it was super clear. You know, it's sort of like a employee said versus manager said situations where it's like, I was totally in line for this promotion, but then they said they had to give it to a girl. And it's like, did that happen?
Did that happen? Exactly
or
like that.
Are you justifying it to yourself why you didn't get the promotion you thought you were going to get?
Yeah.
But there's something interesting in there that like when you prioritize DEI stuff so much, it I think becomes an easy explanation for a lot of things. In a way that probably isn't helpful, and I think can harm the people who were hired under the program, right? Because if you were a fully qualified, you know, top of your field new hire who, you know, fits into one of these minority groups, then how much do your coworkers trust that you were hired for your qualifications? If there's 100%. Like any policy that's like, and then if a person looks like this, we don't look at their qualifications. Not that it got that far, but like that.
If that's the impression
people have.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think some people, like some Black people that are opposed to affirmative action, that's part of the reason why, is it's because like they can experience like never being treated as if they've earned their position, even if they 100% have earned their position, because there's always the like, oh, are you a diversity hire sort of like, you know, floating around. And that sounds like incredibly frustrating.
Totally. Well, and there's also just a bit to like the diversity hires at Google or whatever company, where I don't know. It's like a question of like where in the pipeline of people getting careers should a disproportionate access be handled. Like is the solution to having more minorities working at Google like improving inner city schools at the elementary level? You know what I mean? Like, it seems like that could set up people to be well qualified and ready to go at Google without Google changing a thing, right? Google, like, still hiring fully based on merit or as close as they can measure with their weird puzzles that they give their interviewees or whatever. It's like, it's this weird, okay, it's a weird thing that I'm curious what you think of, because it like blends ideas we talk about. There's like an idea I feel like in the current social movements that companies should bear some responsibility to improve social situations, like that companies should hire racially diverse workforces, that sort of thing. Or I don't know, that like Uber should charge fair prices even on New Year's Eve because people need to get to the hospital, or whatever it might be. And it's this weird shift, I think, of responsibility from the state to private enterprise.
I'm so glad you brought this up. Yeah, okay. So if I remember correctly, Kamala Harris tweeted during the early pandemic about this fund that had opened to support like servers and bartenders that had been laid off or had their hours cut severely. And she was like, oh, like these people don't have a safety net. You should donate to this fundraiser. And people were like, you are the vice president.
Right.
Like if there's no safety net, you are literally responsible for there being no safety net. Why are you sending people to a GoFundMe? Like, what is going on? And like, I think that moment like perfectly encapsulates that, right? It's like, just shifting the blame, shifting the responsibility, from the government. And it's this tricky thing, because I think like the reverse also happens, right? Like if Walmart pays such poor wages that their workers require food stamps to be able to eat enough, then actually the government's kind of subsidizing the company in one respect or one way of thinking about it, right? Because the company is not paying enough money to people to stay alive, to go back to work, right?
But I think that
there's a real blurring.
The fascinating option for dealing with that problem is for the social safety net to compete with Walmart more. By which I mean, if you are unemployed but you can still have food and shelter,
right, then
Walmart needs to make a better offer than barely having food and shelter to get you to work for them.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And I feel like
it dovetails in a way, right?
So often it's like a criticism of a company for a policy. Not that I don't think companies are above criticism or anything, but it's like a lot of these things could be solved sort of at the state level by the state providing more for citizens than like the companies would have to step up on their, just to keep going, right? To keep people employed. It's like it's so easy for companies to abuse employees when it's like, if you don't have a job, you're gonna die.
Yeah.
But if the thing is, if you don't have a job, you're gonna have to tighten your belt a bit, and you and your family will remain fed and sheltered.
Yeah.
Then suddenly the company holds so less sway over people, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It's sort of like it's a race to the bottom right now when you have like such a lack of safety net in the States, and then you have companies that are like trying to offload even more. And And yeah, it would be so fascinating if, there was an adequate. I mean, that's one of the biggest arguments for universal basic income, right? Is that it's like, if you are actually in a position to choose between like a horrible, terrible, undignified job or furthering your education, because you don't need to be wealthy to do that. A lot of people choose education, right? A lot of people choose to improve their skills if they're not like trapped by their financial circumstances.
Right. Totally. And then it probably ends up, even for the, people who strictly care about the economy, it's better to have a better educated populace who works higher paying jobs. That's like, I think it would be a net win is what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. It's not like, and then, we just won't have companies anymore. It's like, no, I think we'll find like great new efficiencies and new heights for standard of living, which I think is a good goal.
I also like a high standard of living for everybody.
Totally.
Maybe it's just me. I've been thinking about that lately.
Radical statements here.
Like watching true crime and someone is like, I think pedophilia is a bad thing. And you're like, cool. Good job taking a stand.
Yeah, going out on a limb on that one.
Going out on a limb.
I think Google Gemini also. I actually think Google Gemini failed that test. I saw someone who asked it if pedophilia is bad, and it equivocated. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know how that happened.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that's it, eh?
Yeah, I think so. I think just the last thing I'll throw in is like, I liked one of the quotes in that article that said, the Gemini fallout proves Google's aim isn't to promote diversity, he said, but rather it's to let a group of people's personal opinions bleed into the product. And I think that's a really good way of saying it, because I think that the majority of people care about diversity, but that doesn't mean they support like specific diversity policies or that they want diversity to be prioritized over like the quality of services. And it's like the language puts you in a really awkward position, right? Because like, oh, are you going to say you're anti-diversity? Are you going to say you're anti-racist, right? Like it really... part of what's so difficult about critiquing it is that is the language aspect of it. You don't want to be on the wrong side of things.
Yeah. No, I like that distinction though, critiquing like the specific policy versus like the goals. And okay, I've got one more thing I got to say too, which is just that like Google is like a huge company and only a tiny bit of it is involved in this stuff, Google Gemini or like any political arena at all. Like it's mostly very boring computer stuff and like duct taping weird systems to each other. So it's I don't know. I think it's a bit, the article overstates a bit maybe how central to Google all of this is. But
so you don't think we're going to see a social justice-y nation of Google popping up anytime soon?
Probably not. Although I wouldn't be surprised if we see a new CEO of Google soon.
That sounds less surprising. All right. Well, this has been Hot Take Think Tank. Until next time.